All right. Well, thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you to talk about something which is a very nuanced topic, which is the relationship between authors and editors. You all know what authors do because you read their books. That's why you're here at the Jaipur Literature Festival. But Ravi and I are editors. Malavika is an author. And what we do is not as well known. And it's the kind of job which, if it is too well known what we do, then we've not done our job very well. It is our job to be invisible. And then what an editor does and how authors and editors work together is the topic of our discussion today. So it's like the invisible profession. So I'm sure a lot of you in the audience may or may not be aware of what the role of an editor is. And just for some context, Ravi Singh is the person who taught me everything I know about editing. So the good, the bad, and the ugly, I owe him everything. So my first question is to Ravi. Ravi, what do editors do? And sorry, just to say, this is not a whiskey, it's just some sparkling water. Yeah.
So what editors also do is to provide vodka to authors like Vikram Seth when they're having sessions. That's also part of their job. It's difficult. I mean, Meru, you could answer this question
Okay.
just as well, but...
Please go ahead.
So I think what we do is look at the entire range of what an editor would do. And Malavika, I think, has had experience of that in the sense that if you're lucky and if you have a rapport with an author, and that usually happens, I mean, not that it can't happen if they're not authors that you've worked with before, but it usually happens with authors that you've worked with and you're working with them on their second book or their third book. It starts, ideally, before they've even started writing the book. They have an idea for a book, or they may have, got a very rough draft of some chapters or an outline of it done. But while they're thinking it through, they're talking to the person, editor. So that is the best kind of author-editor relationship which begins at that point. And then often it isn't just the same editor who stays with the book. I mean, it does in India especially, and especially in smaller houses where you don't have too many people and too much specialization. But what happens is that, an author would have started, which is what happened in this, with Malavika's book, is that we were discussing it when she was thinking it. She and I, and she would send me. And, I also have to say that the other thing is that authors also understand their editors sometimes just as much as editors understand their authors. So I would think, my God, a response that I haven't sent or the kind of response that I have sent to a message that she's sent about a book, she'd probably say, just bugger off, I don't want to work with you. But she didn't, so anyway, so then while the book was being thought through and written, I was sort of closely involved. But the sort of final stages, it was Meru who saw the book through, and I don't mean just line editing, but also because when we talk about it more, you'll understand how complicated the book is in many layers and different levels. And so it was further helping her refine the structure and then the line edit, etc. So well, that's what, you start from sometimes before the book is being written, and then you stay with the authors till after the book has been written also.
Absolutely. So in a way, what you're talking about here is the earliest part of the author-editor relationship, and maybe we can move chronologically. The part when the author is still conceptualizing the book, what it could be. And I always think of every book as, there's something an author is trying to say, and the editor's job is to help them say it in a way that a reader will understand. Because it sounds very simple, but it's actually not that simple. So Malavika, can you tell us from your perspective, an author's perspective, what is it that you are wanting from an editor at this stage to help you make your work be the best that it can be?
Right, so I've worked with, I've written 2 books, and both have been with Speaking Tiger and Ravi really, when I was not known as just a lawyer, I don't even think you'd read Intimacy Undone. We just had a conversation, and I told him this is what it's about and so on, and he said, all right. And I couldn't quite believe it. I said, but don't you want to read it? But I've now come to the conclusion that it's his career. So he cuts through the faff very fast. Like I'd give him a big flabby manuscript and he'd return it in like a day and say no. And then another time I handed him a change thing when we were having a drink. I just handed it over. He looked at it like this and said, not yet. I said, but you haven't read it. But I think you just are trained now. You get that. So from that perspective, of course, the responses, and Ravi's, one of my complaints, which was a joke actually, is that I now have them captive here. So I can actually, otherwise one just constantly looking for them. But that's an unfair, it was just on a lighter note. But it's an important relationship. It's, I think while you are writing, and I am still so tentative about even calling myself an author, because it's something I began doing when I crossed 50 and I've spent my life as a lawyer. So to assume this identity of calling myself an author, I do with a strange joy and pride, and yet also tentative. I'm still not sure that I am one. But having said which, because you're so tentative, and I think now having talked to other people who I do think are authors, I know are authors, they also say it's a common feeling, which is that you're never quite sure. You're always vulnerable. And you need to, and to be any other way probably is not a good idea, because I think that vulnerability and openness to what you think is important. And then, of course, comes the stage where you say, well, it doesn't matter what anybody says, like the time when he said, oh my God, will she even want to, etc. Because then you go ahead anyway. You take the advice. Meru recently gave me some advice. I heard it, but I didn't take it. But the truth is, I now acknowledge she was right. So that's a back and forth, and therefore it's a close relationship. It sometimes can be fraught. It requires mutual patience and loyalty. So it's a lovely relationship.
Absolutely, and also it's a delicate relationship, because in a way it's very raw, very personal, because
Yes.
most of the times writers are writing about something which is deeply meaningful to them. And you said the word vulnerability, because there's nothing quite worse for an editor than an invulnerable book,
Oh, yeah.
A book in which the author has no self-doubt, no introspection, no self-awareness. And I always think of it a bit like being like a makeup artist, is what I think of myself. That it's like, as a makeup artist, you're seeing somebody's face without makeup, but you're not saying you don't look beautiful without makeup. You're saying, here's how you could look in front of the camera if you had makeup on. That's kind of how I see it. But what do you think is the best way, Ravi, to give feedback to an author at this stage, at this very early stage, when you don't want to scare the writer away from their idea, but at the same time, you want to help them give it some shape. You don't want them to get frightened off, but you also need them to, sort of do some of that hard, heavy lifting.
So that would depend, depend on the stage at which you're giving the feedback. If there's somebody who submitted a manuscript, you haven't yet accepted it. And you may or may not accept it depending on the revisions that you want them to do. The feedback you give at that point, and the feedback that you give when you have signed up an author, or you know that you want to publish them and that has been communicated to them, and you're in it, in a sense, you're in it together already. So that would differ.
Yes.
So an unsolicited manuscript, even unsolicited or coming to you through an agent or whatever. We rarely work with agents, so I keep forgetting that that's also another way of acquiring books. But because you don't know the author well enough at that point, so you don't want to be brutal, number one, but at the same time, you're not invested in it enough to really, dress it up too much when you're giving them feedback. And then later, of course, when you've accepted the author's work and you've talked to them, you've read it, and they also are sort of convinced that you are on their side because you're going to publish it and you've read it. At that time, you can, you need to be tactful, yes, but you can also be more forthright. You know what I mean? Of course, it's important to be forthright even with the person you haven't yet accepted, but you're not sure how they will take it. You're not invested enough in it. So that's one. The other is really to convince, in both cases, you have to convince them that you respect them enough as writers. Otherwise, they're not going to take your feedback, or will do it reluctantly, or won't really, be on your side just as you're on their side. So I think that I would say is really the one thing that you need to ensure, is that you read it, understand it, and whatever feedback you're giving is honest, and also coming from a space of honesty and professionalism equally.
Absolutely. In a way, what you're doing is you're being honest, but you're also protecting the author. You're protecting the author from what a reader might say, and from how the mistakes that you can make with an editor. You're trying to make sure that those things are covered before a reader gets to them. So, Malavika, from your perspective,
you make it sound like a parent-child relationship.
No, it is.
I don't know about that.
It's a bit like that.
It is a bit like that, and it's also a relationship which will work only, as I said, when there is mutual respect.
Trust. Yeah.
And trust. Because otherwise, when you're an editor, it isn't as if you know everything there is to know about what a book should be. And to get the authors to listen to you is not always easy. And also, you as editors need to be convinced about your, for lack of a better word, insignificance in a sense. The book will happen even if you were not the editor, even if you were not the publisher.
And it's not your book.
It will.
I mean,
it's you at the end of the day, it is not your book. Although we forget that, and that also is a sign actually of a good editor, is that you forget that it's not your book, and you fight with the author saying, no, this is not how it will be. I remember once, when I just started work, joined Penguin, I was a year or year and a half into my thing, and at that time was, mid-20s. And B.K. Nehru's memoir, sorry, we're digressing from a book. B.K. Nehru's memoir, and he at that time was almost 90. It's a wonderful memoir, and so, but it went on and on and on and on and on.
Is it the one where good guys come second?
Yes, yeah. And nice guys finish second.
Nice guys finish second, yeah.
It was just endless. So then I would talk to him about it on the phone, and once we also met, and then he took on board a lot of things. Some he didn't want to, and I was arguing with him, and then he just turned to me and said, but it is my book. And I said, well, you're fine. So that's a good lesson. And so, of course, it was a mutual thing. We agreed on some things and some things stayed. But an interesting thing about that book is, now here's the other thing. When you find an author like that, we didn't know each other very much, but there was some affection despite this quarrel that we had. When the book came out, for a number of reasons, whatever happened, must have been at least, okay, I'm exaggerating, maybe not 400, but maybe 100, 150 typos in it. Something happened at that time. And I thought this is the end of my career in publishing, and he's going to, but he was very tolerant and all. He said, well, we had some good times together, etc. So anyway, I've digressed. But the point is, it is, as you said, an equation of mutual trust. That's why it begins.
And Malavika, how do you know, for example, you say you trust us, but now this is the time to find out. Do you trust us, and why do you trust us? And if you don't, then why?
So, okay. So I have to say, while you were talking, I have an experience, of similar experience, because I've spent so much time in theatre. And it is the relationship of the actor and the director. And it's actually, the actor is never their own person. It's a immersive experience. You can't say, because you're not a star, you're an actor. So you can't say, so there are these lines and you're working with them and you're doing what, I have always been, many directors have told me I've been a director's dream. Because I actually simply submit. And they'll say, but we see this, we see that, and I submit absolutely to the process because I enjoy it. I enjoy the submission, and I enjoy what emerges. Then at some point you take back. So when you are ready, formed in what you think he wants you to be, is then when you start bringing you've by then understood what you are playing better. You can't do it with reading a script. So you've started, you've spent time on it, you've understood it. And the joke used to be that Malavika picks up many nuances of her lines after the show's over. Because I keep thinking about them and so on. And then the next shows would be better and so on. It's the same relationship of trust. But the important thing is he will never say, oh, but why didn't you raise your voice there and do it like that? Because then that would irritate me, because I'm not a circus animal. So it has to be one of friendship where he says, this is what I see in this script. This is what would be required. Let's see what you do with it. A good director will always do that. A bad director will do it himself and then say copy. And you walk out of that play. So it's the same thing. It's the same relationship. I've done more plays than I've written books, so the analogy works for me at this point.
Thank you. Sorry,
Can I
Ravi.
ask you something? So,
Yeah, sure.
Especially Malvika's book, especially this one, Unpartitioned Time, it's tremendous because it's trying to do things differently, maybe not even deliberately. She wanted to be different, but that is just the kind of sensibility she has, the kind of story, personal story about her family that she wanted to tell. But so it is about her father, it's about her parents, both mother and father, extended family. It is about the Sikh community. It's also about faith. It is about culture and partition. And she would make these connections with the Mahabharata at one point at the first draft, and some of it did survive in the final. She was also connecting that then with the Grand Trunk Highway, the highway, and then Mahabharata, Karan, Sikhism, the Sikh gurus and all. And then it's also personal. So it's cultural, political, personal, at so many levels. And then when it came to you, it was still trying to do all of that. How, as an editor, do you deal with something like that? Because this is very complicated. It might be challenging for readers, and yet that is really the strength of the book as well, and the writing as well. So how do you manage that? Because as editors, a lot of them just want to make it reader-friendly. Even a literary work should be accessible, and readers should connect with it immediately. But that's something that you couldn't really do, I would think, with a manuscript like this.
So I guess for me as an editor, this is just my personal approach to editing. I feel that for me, I'm always, in every book that I edit, I'm trying to first identify the core emotional truth that you are trying to convey. And I do believe that every book has that core emotional truth. I'm a very instinctive reader. I'm not a very technical reader. So I don't believe that I like to put my rational mind to sleep when I'm reading. I know it sounds contradictory, but and for me, her book was all of these things, but really it was a book about grief. That's what I felt when I read it. And there's a strange thing that I've noticed about writers. It's quite a common thing that the thing they want to write about the most is the thing they will not write about, okay? So they will write about everything. They will spin a huge web. And in the middle of that web is a huge hole. And I'm always trying to find that hole in every book, because that is where you will find the spider. And with her, I felt there was a lot going on, but there was a hole at the center of it. I won't get into what that was, but I told her very honestly what it was, and she didn't agree with me at the time. She completely said, no, that's not what it is. And then a few months later, she called me. She said,
I said exactly what but it's my book, and I don't want to write about that, but I want to write about this. But it made complete sense, what you
She took a few months, because to be fair, it was a very big thing which I said, which was a very personal observation that I had made. And to be fair to Malvika, she took that feedback from me, and it was a very, very personal thing. And she took her time, and in a few months, she had time to emotionally process the feedback that I had given her, and then she was able to accept it. So I think one of the things about the author-editor relationship is time. Yeah. That you need time to be able to process reading the book, giving the feedback, and receiving the feedback. All of these things take time, because this is not just the same at the developmental editing stage of saying, this line doesn't make sense. That happens later. But just so that I can explain to the audience, right now we're talking about structural editing, developmental editing, when you're really trying to figure out what a book is. So what happens after that is, once you have taken that feedback and you have done all of this, we move on to another stage of editing, which is called copy editing, which is when you sort of get into the nitty-gritties of, but how is it possible that you're calling your aunt Chachi here, but there she's your mommy? This character has blue eyes in page 1, but on page 5 they have brown eyes. That's copy editing. That's a very, very rigorous and difficult kind of editing, and which can sometimes seem very annoying, I think, to writers also, where they feel it's quite interventionist compared to developmental editing, which is more general. So can you tell the audience, Ravi, because you're obviously so experienced at this, about what is copy editing, why it's important, and also for you, Malavika, what does that, how important it is, even though it's a bit of an annoying part of the process, but it really helps to take the manuscript to the next level.
Well, copy editing, of course, it's important because a lot of, when we say copy, a lot of people think it's only about, dotting the I's, crossing the T's. But that's proofreading, which is also very, very important, and an art that, not an art, but just, close attention to the text, which most people now not able to bring to that. But copy editing is, line editing is, looking at the sentences where they work or not, is it too convoluted, and then fact-checking, etc. All of that is part, which is really very, very important. And it is there that your relationship with the editor is actually tested. Because before that, as you said, it is collaborative. You're together with them. The thing has not been set there on paper where the author feels, this is my work, and they feel possessive about it. Ideas can be talked about. Structure can be talked about.
They can be abstract.
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas there, it's, the lines are there on the page, and you're changing them. It's not only about fact-checking, it may also be about, improving a line sometimes. Now, this may sound like an arrogant thing to say that you know better than the author what it should be, but, it does happen sometimes that the author hasn't paid enough attention to one particular part of the manuscript. So anyway, so now there is where it is tested, because I, for instance, and I'm not saying that that's a good thing, but that's just how how I work. I don't do track changes. I just can't work. Somehow my mind just switches off. I can't. And increasingly now, it's shocking how many authors there are, especially younger ones, who say, but you haven't done track changes. And I say, well, I'm not going to do track changes. So there, that's where you see how possessive authors become about their sentences, etc., etc. So therefore, it is even more important. If you're still together, if you still are agreeing.
It's like a very long marriage which is being tested every step of the way.
I know, after the 7 or 10 or 14 years, whatever, these annoying things, you don't make
There are some things you just let them pass.
This is how I want my pillow to be. Why do you want to change the position of my pillow and all of that? So there, of course, it is. So what I'm trying to say, it is not only about just grammar, etc. Even at that stage, it is about nuance. It is about certain things which there would be no rule book for, which is being done even at the copy editing stage. And that's really important. And it again tests the editor's commitment to the book, because you would have tired and you have other things to do, and you say, okay, so
you
how does
still care, really, essentially.
Yeah. And
a
lot like
marriage. And
it's you also the thing.
She's India's top divorce lawyer, so she can tell us this from the perspective of a lawyer and an editor.
True. That is true. And then also the other thing is, sometimes you look at a printed book which you haven't published, and you say, I could have edited this, copy editing or even taking out things, but it got the booker. So then what do?
Nothing. You go have a drink.
I'm not going to tell you. More than one. Yeah.
Yeah, I know what he's talking about. But Malavika, tell us what do you, now that we've got this analogy of marriage and copy editing, and you've seen a lot of marriages break up, and you have been on, seen a lot of acrimonious divorces. What's the connection between editing and failed marriages.
Yeah, so you can't divorce. I mean, you're too invested at that time. So you just have to make
You have
it
to do.
work.
You have to make it work for the
You
children.
have to make it work for the children. Oh, spot on, spot on. You have to make it work for the book. So you just take each day, take a deep breath, go and take a small thing. Like when I was describing my Pragya, she did a very detailed edit, and one of the things which is struck in my mind, and she sent it to me, the email I was reading at night while lying in bed, and she said, I know that sweaty mithai can be fun, but can flies be fun? Now see, the sentence was describing the village life, and I said, it can be fun, it's sweaty mithai, heat and flies. Now I realized
That's a typical
that she's,
copy editor's response.
and she's right. But I got irritated because, yes, I mean, I can't just say heat and flies wasn't there and it was fun, and I can't say it was fun but for the flies, and that's still the complete picture, and I remember it as fun. So I just replied to say yes. So you go through those, but I was also very moved by the detail. You see?
It's an act of care.
It's an act of care. So I'd much rather that she asks me the question and I will risk the irritation and I will respond and perhaps piss her off, but we are committed to the child.
Okay. All right. Ravi, so what's the most brutal thing that you've ever said to an author about their book? And what's the most brutal thing that you would have liked to say but did not say?
Yeah, I've never been brutal.
Rubbish.
No.
He's extremely brutal, Ravi. You can be.
To authors? No. I
He
mean,
simply says it won't work.
No,
Malavika,
yeah.
this
Yeah,
won't
that's
work.
true. So then what you're
That's
saying...
brutal enough. I mean,
and authors
pretty brutal.
and authors have not been brutal back. That's the other really good authors. If you're a really good author, except for a few exceptions, they don't come back to you saying, "Don't do this to my
Yeah,
book.
most
Why are you
people
doing
don't.
this?" The best authors really are those who listen.
Absolutely.
They may not take on board everything that you say, but they often do take on board more than half of what you're saying. And that really is, I think, part of their being good authors.
Yes.
Because to them, you are also a reader.
yes.
And, if you can convince them that you are a reader who's paying attention to the book, what else does an author want? I
And
would
like
think?
I said, you're always writing from a position of vulnerability. So you need the responses. You can never be sure. It's foolish, I believe, that to be completely sure. You
Malavika,
can't
what
be.
does it feel like to be an author who has written something deeply personal and you're waiting? Because I know that a lot of authors they find it quite stressful to receive an edit. So I thought the next question I have is for you, which is, what does it feel like to get feedback from an editor, and what's the best way to take that feedback? We know how to give it, but what's the best way to receive it?
I am a lawyer who spent 40 years growing up in a court getting humiliated by a judge every day. And I have fought, pushed back. So an editor's feedback is like, okay, I don't care, really. I really have no ego on that front as long as the work gets done. Just as you'll take the beating from the judge as long as my case is heard and I get what I want. Basically, I'm interested in the end product. And I don't want to waste emotion on the small interaction. I'd rather focus on the aesthetic, which I'm committed to.
Absolutely. So, Ravi, you have been now an editor for how many years now? How long has it been?
31.
31 years of being an editor and publisher. How do you think our profession has changed in these 30 years? He's looking at me like, I don't, all right.
Difficult. In some ways, it hasn't changed because the best editors still are those who understand what we used to do. Also, they also bring that level of care, and they also are people who are, while confident about their skills, are also what's it called? Sometimes uncertain about the feedback that they're giving. If it's, and they think about it twice and then are willing to be corrected themselves by the author or by a colleague. So there are, but in other ways, how has it changed? It's changed in that this relationship with authors, and long-term relationship with authors, especially debut authors who then go on to do their best work later, that is becoming rare, at least from what I've seen, because there is this race to hold on to your job, especially as companies become bigger, more players come into the market. Also, there is far more noise about the big book and the bestseller and the award winner, and we both, in a sense, had as our as somebody who, well, maybe not groomed us, but gave us our opportunities and we looked up to. One of the things that annoyed me intensely about him was that he would say, "This is fabulous. This is the greatest book ever written." And I said, "Just shut up," And of course, we did, good-natured shutting up. But the thing is that that's the other thing that's happened now, is that you have to climb every mountain. You have to be, you have to be right on top. And so what happens is that a lot of really good, interesting writing doesn't get and authors don't get the attention that they should, because everybody's looking for the next big thing. And I think that is what has changed, and that's very depressing.
That's absolutely true. That I think that, and also some of that has to do with technology. That how people find books has changed so much that if most people, earlier they would have gone to a bookshop and found a book that they never heard of. What's changed is now if you go on Amazon, you're looking at the top 10 books on Amazon, most likely, and the intent of the buyer has changed. So in people who walk into a bookshop are looking to be surprised, but it's search-based intent for Amazon, that you're going in there because you already know what you want to buy. So that of course has changed. I often hear of people who say, what kind of book should I write? I'd love to know actually how many people in the audience would like to write a book or have already written a book. See, so mostly, and now put your hands down. How many of you want to be editors? she already is, yeah. Okay, that's nice to see. There's one. Barbara. Hi, Barbara. Yeah.
I'll tell you who the very enthusiastic person is. She set up a publishing house, which today is about 22 years old and is fantastic.
Barbara, let's give a huge round of applause for Barbara.
And a great. She's
a great
friend.
publisher.
See, so editor. Here you have really the best kind of old world publisher editor who is sitting there and waving her hand after having,
And she still has that enthusiasm for editing. But I have another observation. The people who raise their hands either already are editors or are kind of somewhere along the way. Anyway, the reason I'm saying this is there's a mismatch here. There's a lot of people who want to be writers, not that many who want to be editors. So my question then is for Malavika, is given the demands on editors' time, what is it that you ideally, as an author, want from an editor? Given you could see the constraints, maybe 3 people raise their hand.
I would like the editor not to disregard the other commitments and just respond to me, obviously, but I also know that can't happen.
You are a rare author.
Yeah. No, Meru, I've been using you. You've been a godsend, because even with Unpartitioned, I would still have been fiddling, tinkering, waiting. But then when I talked to you and you said, "Okay, I'm developing something and let's see what happens," and now I'm using it for the book I'm writing currently, which is going to be my 3rd, which I'm very excited about. And the process is. There are dark moments when you're finishing and you say, I'm done, but now I will send it to the editor and wait for a response. And here those dark moments are fewer, because then I use the software and it gives me responses which are it's incredible. To tell you, one day I'd written something, the end of the day, and it was kind of, I was just banging it all out, duck. And then I said, okay, let me see what I've done today, let's get the feedback. and it responded to say, whatever. It always also remembers to say the nice thing. So you've trained
have
it
trained
well.
it well.
So, but we'll say, to say such and such thing is mean-spirited. And I said, oh my God, if Meru had told me or Ravi would have told me, I would have said, oh really, but I want to be mean. But AI is telling me then, okay, if AI, the soulless person,
Thinks I'm being mean.
is calling me mean, it must be really bad. It must be horrible.
Wonderful. Well, okay, thank you so much to both of you. What I would like to do now is open it up to the audience, and we can sort of continue our conversation but also include the audience. Is that fine? All right, lots of questions. Okay, let's start with the lady over here because you raised your hand first. Can you introduce yourself, and can we also stick to questions and not comments?
Can we have more lights there or no, that's not possible? It's
Well,
okay.
this light can be...
Yeah.
Hello, sir, ma'am. Thank you so much for this wonderful, insightful session. I'm Dr. Chavi Gandhi, and I want to ask something. It might be a little bit controversial. I'm very sorry for that in
Oh, that's
advance.
good.
So there are certain, now self-publishing is taking over, and there are certain self-published authors who have this misconception they don't need editors because they have Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid, and they're writing coaches who are teaching them that. Can you please break a myth for them?
Well, I mean, I'll just give you a simple answer. I think every book has its own journey, and some do well when they're self-published, some do well when they're published. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all formula, so I don't want to say that that's the wrong path. So yeah, I would say each book finds its own path, is my view.
And this is not recent, at least in my experience. What you're saying is that because they're self-publishing and because it's easier, and therefore they're told, or they feel, a lot of them, that they don't need to be edited, whatever is done. In my experience, and this is something Ashokji, who's here, can. So there are these in the English language also, but I had noticed this earlier, and because I only read Hindi apart from that and a bit of Punjabi, a lot of very, very well-established Hindi authors would send in stuff, and they would expect it to be, the book to be ready 3 days later or a week later. और क्या करना है इसमें? Editing का तो concept ही नहीं था, and that has changes, and the best of them, of course, would listen. But in terms of anybody, तो पता नहीं अशोक जी, अब अगर मैं गलत कह रहा हूँ तो आप मुझे correct कीजिएगा. But हाँ, तो ये, this is not new. But as I said again, the best authors know that doesn't work. And this whole Grammarly, Shamily thing, I mean, which author, if they take that seriously, how they shouldn't call themselves authors, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what kind of book. I mean, the point about Grammarly is it makes everybody sound the same, right? And that's what we want to avoid, because you want to always retain the author's individuality. But I wouldn't say that, I mean, there are authors who have done very well by being self-published, and we don't know. They may have had an editor. We sometimes don't know. The editor is invisible.
Yeah, that's true. They may have editors outside of the self-publishing house that they were working.
Usually there'll be
with.
somebody which you won't have heard of, who will just have done it. Sometimes as a friend, or there are people. So who's next? Who would like to go next? Please.
Hello, Meru, I'm Dr. Sunil Vaid. You edited my book and sent it back 20 times. Is Editrix as good?
I think it's a little bit nicer than me, for sure.
Wow.
One more thing if I want to ask. What is the chronology? Agent, editor, publisher. Who comes where?
First you go to the agent or the publisher, and then to the editor. Yes. Thank you. Please go ahead. There's a lady in the front. Both, either of you can duel it out.
Thank you. So my name is Anna Kapoor, and I had a question, Meru, Ravi, for you from an editor's perspective. So you spoke a lot about the developmental editing part of the process, and honestly, as an aspiring first-time author, that sounded like a treat, right? But you also spoke about the constraints of time. So my question is, from an editor's lens, or what do you look for to even judge that this is worth investing the time to develop?
You go first, Ravi.
It would depend on the particular book. For instance, just to talk about Malavika's 2 books. The first book, at least before you've read it, the thing was that this is a book like this on this subject hasn't been written before. this is somebody who's very articulate and, has the experience, and this book needs to be written. And the way she spoke to me, or just a couple of lines, you knew that this is a book you want to publish. So that in non-fiction books, it's easier to do that. Unpartitioned, if I hadn't known her already and respected her as a writer and a mind, and I knew what she was trying to do would be interesting, if that came to me as the first debut author's thing, I would be a little uncertain. Because it's trying to do so much.
That's interesting.
Would you be able to? Can you pull it off? So when there isn't any track record, you don't know, you haven't worked with them, you haven't read the full manuscript, you would be a little uncertain. But the commitment really comes if you're committed, and if you're going to give any feedback or work with them, you've already in your mind told yourself that you will publish this. So it's difficult to give you a formula, but in your mind, as an editor or publisher, you've already said, yes, this is worth my kind of time. So how that happens, don't know. Just send it and see.
So in my case, I would say I try to do this with every book that I have published, which is not to say that it's always been quite so, cut and dry, but I try to think about who is saying this, whatever is being said, who is saying it, what point of view are they coming from? Are they being able to say it clearly and effectively? Who else has said it before? And what are you adding to the conversation? So this is what I look for personally. Next, Chintan, please go ahead.
This is either for Meru or Ravi. Often when people are writing, they write from a very fragile place inside themselves. What are the emotional expectations that authors have of editors? And do you feel equipped to be a therapist if that's what the author is expecting of you?
Malavika, you answer this.
No, Meru can be, although she may come across as somebody who's just so cut and dried, etc., and she's very sure, she would be better at being a therapist than,
That's probably true, Ravi.
Yeah.
Take that one.
I think, and maybe interestingly, that may actually also be because there's greater clarity. She has a greater clarity of mind than I do, and I'm not saying this as I'm not saying this as something that we've been friends long enough for me not to have to say good things about her. But that is really so. Yes, it is important to be a therapist, and it is the worst part sometimes of being an editor, especially if you don't like the author. You like the book, but not the author.
It happens, by the way. Yeah. But Ravi, and Chintan, to answer your question, I do not like to be a therapist to an author. And in fact, though you will read a lot about people saying, oh, my editor is my best friend and things like that, I'm always very clear that I am not your friend. And if you want a friend, please make a friend. And I'm not here to be your friend. And I don't want to be. I'm a very introverted and solitary person. And I like to be able to, I think a friendship can complicate that. The author-editor relation. Not for everybody, but for me, definitely. I like it to be a relationship where it's not a relationship like any other. And I don't feel like, you have to be best friends or therapists. I think that is avoidable, according to me.
I don't know. See, so already you see that there's no one cookie cutter kind of thing. There are different people, different editors.
Step in as a divorce lawyer if you don't. It's the same
please.
thing. Clients expect the divorce lawyer to be a therapist. Yes. And sometimes I'm able to give them that same thing. The case excites me, but sometimes the client, I keep saying, you're not a nice person. Now, how do you, so there is that complex. So it's best to say what you're saying. I'm not your friend. You need a therapist. And I'll say that.
Yeah, get a therapist or get a friend. But
that's what I'm saying. Well, for me, I will edit, and I think I'll do a good job, even if I'm not friends with the person. But my best editing happens when I have some kind of connection with the author.
Thank you. Who's next?
My name is Mira.
Just wait for the mic. How much more time do we have?
I think
This is the last question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for taking my question. My name is Mira. I'm an aspiring novelist. So I'm very curious about how it works between the editor and writer if the writer is playing with language in a certain way to really push boundaries around fiction writing, prose writing in a literary fashion. I'm just wondering how much control or power the editor has compared to the writer if you're not writing just totally straight prose, like if you're being more creative or playful with language.
No, it's not the editor's business to have control over a book that is not yours. You need to just to give you one example of if not too many people would have read that book, and I read it only because we were at one point thinking of publishing his next book. Damon Gale Good, is that how his name is pronounced? And in this book, it's called Strange Rooms or something. There's no capitalization. Suddenly there's capitalization. Suddenly, it's trying to do something. Arundhati tried to do that with, which I thought worked sometimes. It didn't work sometimes in God of Small Things. And also, but the point is they know what they're trying to do. As an editor, you know what they're trying to do. If you're not convinced about it at all, you can't be a good editor. But if you are, then you can maybe argue with them. But no, of course, it's not the editor's job to.
I think from my case, I would approach something like that. The only thing which really matters is can you pull it off or not, from my perspective. That you can try and do anything, but can you pull it off is really what matters in this particular area. Anyway, but I think we've run out of time. So thank you all. Thanks to Malavika and to Ravi and to the audience for being with us today.